Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so unsettling, that it clung to you long after you woke, leaving behind a residue of fear that you couldn't quite explain? I'm Eric Draven, a journalist who has spent years diving into the darkest corners of the unknown, unearthing secrets that most people would rather leave buried. But this story is different. It didn't come from the outside world. It came from inside my own mind, or at least that's what I thought. It all started with a dream, but it became something far more sinister, something that defied the boundaries between dreams and reality. If you think nightmares end when you wake up, think again. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything. And trust me, you won't want to face this alone. Before we dive into the terror that still haunts me, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Because once you hear this, you'll need to know how to survive the nightmares that might be waiting for you too. It began innocently enough, or so I thought. At first, it was just a recurring dream, unsettling but not alarming. I would find myself in a place that didn't quite exist in reality, yet it felt familiar in a way that sent shivers down my spine. Imagine standing in a room where the walls shift ever so slightly when you're not looking, where the air carries a weight, thick and oppressive, as if it's filled with the whispers of forgotten souls. The kind of dream that feels too real, like it's trying to pull you deeper, to show you something you're not meant to see. And there, always watching, was it, the figure. At first, it was just a shadow, standing at the edge of my vision, its presence heavy, as though it could see into the darkest parts of my soul. But each night, the dream would grow longer, the figure would draw closer, and the feeling of dread would tighten around me like a noose. I began to wake up drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding, the remnants of the dream clinging to my skin like a second shadow. But it didn't stop when I opened my eyes. The terror followed me into the waking world. Little things, barely noticeable at first, began to change. Shadows in my apartment that seemed longer than they should be. The quiet hum of the night broken by soft, almost inaudible whispers, as if the figure was still watching, waiting. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just stress, exhaustion from my work. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was becoming my reality. As a journalist, I'm trained to be skeptical, to question everything. But how do you question your own mind when it starts betraying you? How do you face a terror that's not only in your dreams, but now stalking your every move, slipping into the spaces between waking and sleep? The figure was no longer confined to the dream world. I could feel its eyes on me even in the daylight. Every time I closed my eyes, it was there, closer, more defined. And as much as I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, something deep inside me screamed that this was only the beginning. So, here I am, standing at the edge of something I can't explain, something that terrifies me to my core. And now, I'm bringing you with me. Stick around, because what I'm about to reveal will make you question everything you think you know about dreams, fear, and the boundaries of reality. It started like any other night. I was exhausted, my mind clouded by the routine chaos of my work as a journalist, piecing together mysteries most people wouldn't dare touch. But that night, when I closed my eyes, the dream came again. Only this time, it felt different. I was no longer a passive observer. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the dream was pressing down on me, pulling me deeper into its dark, twisted world. The moment I woke up within the dream, I was standing in front of an ancient, towering cathedral. Its Gothic spires clawed at the sky, dark clouds swirling overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. The stone was cold, blackened with age, and the large wooden doors creaked ominously as they swung open, as if inviting me inside. I didn't want to enter, but my feet moved on their own, driven by a force I couldn't understand. The smell hit me first. It was a thick, earthy scent, like damp soil that had been left to rot in the dark. There was something else underneath it, a faint metallic tang, like blood left to dry. It clung to my senses, unsettling, almost nauseating. Then came the sound. A low, continuous hum echoed through the cathedral, but there was no source, no machinery, or wind that could explain it. It was the kind of sound that burrows into your bones, vibrating beneath your skin, growing louder with each step. As I walked deeper into the cathedral, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every corner seemed to hold a pair of unseen eyes, tracking my every movement. And then there was the figure, always at the edge of my vision, standing impossibly still, cloaked in shadow. Every time I turned my head to look, it would be gone, only to reappear somewhere else, closer, more defined. The figure never spoke, but its presence screamed danger, an unspoken threat that chilled me to my core. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting reality like heat waves, bending the light around it. My instincts screamed to run, but no matter how fast I tried to move, I couldn't leave. I was trapped, not just in the cathedral, but in the dream itself. I continued to walk, my footsteps echoing loudly on the cold stone floor, each step reverberating in the vast emptiness of the cathedral. But the ground didn't feel solid anymore. It was as if I was walking on something soft, like flesh, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I looked down and saw nothing out of the ordinary, but the sensation lingered. With each step, the weight of the place pressed harder on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My mind kept flashing fragments of déjà vu, as if I had been here before. Yet, I was certain I had never set foot in a place like this, not in real life, anyway. Suddenly, the hum stopped, plunging the entire cathedral into an oppressive silence. It was the kind of silence that feels wrong, unnatural, like the world had paused its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stood frozen, listening intently. Then, from the far end of the cathedral, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers gently drumming against stone. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the vast space, getting louder, more deliberate, as if whatever was making the noise was moving toward me. My heart raced, panic creeping up my spine. I turned, trying to locate the source, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, something shifting in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the figure was no longer just watching. It was coming for me. The shadows around it seemed to twist and writhe like they were alive, stretching out toward me as it moved silently closer. I could feel the temperature drop, the air growing colder with each step the figure took. My body refused to move, locked in place by some invisible force. All I could do was stand there, helpless, as the figure drew nearer, its features still hidden, its presence overwhelming. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The stone floor rippled as if it were liquid, and I stumbled forward, catching myself on a cold, jagged pillar. My hand came away wet, and in the dim light, I could see a dark, thick substance smeared across my palm. It wasn't water. The metallic scent hit me again, stronger this time, filling my nostrils with the unmistakable stench of blood. Panic surged through me as I wiped my hand on my clothes, trying to get rid of the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. It clung to me like a stain, a reminder that this dream, this nightmare, was far more real than I could comprehend. And then, the door appeared, in the far corner of the cathedral, a door that hadn't been there before. It was slightly ajar, and from within, a faint, pulsating light leaked into the dark. Every rational part of me screamed not to go near it, but I couldn't stop myself. The door called to me, pulling me in like a magnet. I had to know what was inside. As I reached for the handle, the low hum returned, louder and more menacing, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my very bones. My fingers touched the cold brass handle, and as I pushed the door open, I felt the undeniable presence of the figure looming behind me. This wasn't just a dream anymore. This was a warning. As the door creaked open, the faint, pulsating light flooded the narrow hallway ahead, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on the stone walls like living things. The hum grew louder, more oppressive, as if the very air was vibrating with an unseen force. I could feel it pressing against my skin, a low-frequency sound that burrowed into my skull, making my thoughts feel sluggish and disjointed. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to slam the door shut and run, but something stronger pulled me forward. Curiosity, or perhaps a deeper, darker compulsion I didn't fully understand. The hallway was narrow, its walls covered in dark, damp stone that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with the hum. I ran my fingers along the rough surface, and for a moment, it felt like something moved beneath my touch, like a heartbeat pulsing just beneath the surface. My breath hitched, and I pulled my hand away, wiping it on my clothes, trying to shake the feeling that the cathedral itself was alive, watching me, waiting. The shadows in the corners of the hallway shifted, moving independently of the light source, twisting into shapes that my mind couldn't fully comprehend. I felt like I was walking through a living nightmare, each step dragging me deeper into a place where reality and dream had fused into something far more terrifying. As I ventured deeper, the sensation of being watched intensified, suffocating in its weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on me, many eyes, hidden just beyond the reach of the dim light, watching from the dark corners of cathedral. My skin crawled with the primal instinct of prey, sensing a predator. I forced myself to keep moving, but with every step, my legs fell heavier, as if something unseen was pulling me back, dragging me deeper into its grasp. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread, but it clung to me, whispering that I wasn't alone here. Something, or someone, was following me. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against stone. My heart leaped into my throat, and I froze, my breath catching in my chest. The sound came again, closer this time, echoing through the narrow hallway. I turned, slowly, scanning the darkness behind me. Nothing, just the endless, shifting shadows. But I knew better. I wasn't alone. The figure was there, hidden in the darkness, watching, waiting for me to make the wrong move. My skin prickled with fear, and for the first time, I felt truly trapped, like a rat in a maze, with no escape in sight. The hallway twisted and turned in unnatural ways, defying logic. It felt like I had been walking for hours, yet the cathedral's dimensions didn't make sense. Time seemed to warp here, stretching and bending in ways that made me question my sanity. Objects appeared and disappeared at the edges of my vision. Small, insignificant things like books or chairs, but their constant shifting left me on edge. I couldn't trust my own senses anymore. Reality was unraveling around me, and with it, so was my grasp on what was real. Then, as I rounded another corner, I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, a figure stood, shrouded in darkness. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, as if it had been stretched beyond human proportions. Its head was bowed, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its gaze locked on me, piercing through the shadows. The hum reached a deafening pitch, vibrating through my bones, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the same figure from my dreams. It had crossed the boundary between the nightmare and reality, and now it was standing before me, more real than ever. My breath came in shallow gasps as the figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the narrow space. The shadows around it twisted and curled, like smoke billowing from a fire. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, my heart racing in my chest. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot as the figure drew closer, its presence suffocating, filling the air with a sense of dread so intense it felt like I was drowning. Suddenly, a door in my right creaked open, a door that hadn't been there before. A soft, flickering light spilled out from within, beckoning me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I weighed my options. Stay and face the figure, or step into the unknown. The figure took another step, and my paralysis broke. Without thinking, I darted toward the door, slamming it shut behind me just as the figure reached the spot where I had been standing. The room I had entered was small and dimly lit by a single, flickering candle on a table in the center. The walls were covered in strange symbols, ancient and cryptic, carved into the stone with precision. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. An object resting on the table. It was a small, ornate box, covered in dust, as though it hadn't been touched in years. Something about it drew me in, compelling me to reach out and touch it. But as my fingers brushed the surface, the door behind me rattled violently, and I could feel the figure's presence just beyond it, as if it was testing the boundaries, waiting for the right moment to break through. I backed away from the table, my hand trembling as I clutched the box. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, as if they were alive, reacting to my presence. The air in the room grew colder, and the candle flickered, casting strange, dancing shadows that seemed to take on forms of their own. I could hear the figure's soft, rhythmic breathing on the other side of the door, each breath slow and deliberate, matching the beating of my heart. I had escaped for now, but I knew it wasn't over. The figure was patient, and it wasn't done with me yet. This nightmare was only just beginning. As I stood there, the weight of the box in my hands, something inside the room shifted. The air, already thick with tension, seemed to pulse with a new, darker energy. The symbols on the walls, which had been subtly glowing, began to shimmer more intensely, their carved edges flickering in the dim candlelight like living things, writhing and twisting in unnatural ways. My breath caught in my throat as the temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't just cold. It was a kind of bone-chilling, oppressive cold that seemed to drain the life from the air, turning every exhale into a fog that hung in front of me like a ghostly reminder of my own breath. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as the pressure around me mounted. With trembling hands, I opened the box, revealing what lay inside. At first, it seemed innocuous. A small, ancient key, made of a metal so tarnished it was almost black. But as soon as my fingers brushed against it, a surge of cold shot through me, like an electric shock that numbed my arm and sent chills racing down my spine. The key was heavier than it should have been, and as I lifted it out of the box, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. Something about this key was wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. It wasn't just an object. It felt alive, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the cathedral. Suddenly, the door behind me, where the figure had been standing moments before, shuddered violently, the sound of which splintering filled the room, and I could hear the unmistakable, slow, deliberate breathing of the figure on the other side. It was close. Too close. My mind raced, screaming at me to run, but my body refused to respond. I was frozen in place, my hand gripping the key so tightly I could feel the edges biting into my palm. The door rattled again, more violently this time, and then silence. A silence so profound, so complete, that it felt like the world had stopped. Even my breath seemed to have been stolen from me. The only sound left was the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then, without warning, the candle flickered out, plunging the room into total darkness. For a moment, I stood there in the pitch black, my eyes straining to adjust, but there was nothing. No light, no sound, just an impenetrable void pressing in on all sides. I was completely and utterly alone, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, the figure. It was there, standing in the darkness, watching, waiting. I could sense its presence, looming just behind me, its cold, unnatural breath ghosting over the back of my neck. My skin crawled with the undeniable certainty that if I turned around, I would see it, closer than ever, its empty eyes locked on mine. Suddenly, a whisper broke the silence. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it was speaking directly to me, calling my name in a slow, deliberate drawl. Eric. The sound of it sent shivers down my spine, a cold, hollow voice that seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing through the empty space of the room. My pulse quickened, and panic surged through me. I couldn't see it, but I knew the figure was right there, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming in terror. And there it was, standing in the corner of the room, bathed in the faint, ethereal glow of the symbols on the walls, was the figure. Its form was no longer obscured by shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that were too long, too thin. Its skin, pale and stretched tight over bone, seemed to almost glow in the dim light. But the worst part was its face, or the lack of one. Where its eyes should have been, there were only deep, hollow voids, dark and bottomless, like staring into the abyss. Its mouth was nothing more than a thin, black slit, twisted into a grotesque semblance of a smile. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat tightened, and my body refused to move, paralyzed by fear. The figure took a step forward, its movements slow, deliberate, as if it were savoring the moment. The air grew colder still, and I could feel the presence of something far more sinister behind those empty eyes. It was as if the figure wasn't just a physical entity, but a conduit for something darker, something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. As it moved closer, my vision blurred, and the world around me began to distort. The walls of the room seemed to stretch and warp, twisting in on themselves as if reality was unraveling at the seams. The symbols on the walls pulsed with an unnatural light, their glow intensifying as the figure approached. And then, just as it reached out toward me with one impossibly long, bony finger, I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to escape this nightmare. But when I opened them again, I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't even in the room. I was lying on the cold stone floor of the cathedral, drenched in sweat, my heart racing in my chest. The figure was gone, but the key was still in my hand, its cold metal pressing into my skin. I scrambled to my feet, my body trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. It had felt so real, too real. But this was no ordinary dream. I knew that now. Something had changed. I could feel it deep in my bones. The figure wasn't just part of the dream. It had crossed over into my reality. And as I stood there, clutching the key, I realized that the nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. When I woke the next morning, the dream felt like a lingering presence, not just in my mind, but woven into my reality. My body was drained, as if I hadn't slept at all. The key, cold and heavy in my hand during the dream, wasn't there when I opened my eyes, but the feeling of its weight still clung to me, leaving my palm cold and tingling. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a vivid nightmare. But deep down, I knew better. There was a creeping certainty inside me that something from that dream had followed me into the waking world. The first sign came when I noticed my reflection in the mirror. It wasn't wrong exactly, but there was something off about it. My eyes, staring back at me, seemed different, like there was something behind them, watching from the depths. I shook my head, splashing cold water on my face, but the unease didn't leave me. It only grew worse as the day went on. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being followed, not by people, but by shadows. In every reflection, in every dark corner, I felt the lingering presence of it, the figure from my dream. The shadows seemed darker, more oppressive, like they were closing in on me, tightening their grip. Determined to shake the feeling, I dove into research. As an investigative journalist, this was my instinct. Find the truth, no matter how unsettling it may be. I started searching for anything that could explain the cathedral, the key, and most importantly, the figure. Hours slipped by as I scoured online forums, old newspaper archives, and obscure websites. And then, I found it. A small, faded article from a local paper dating back over a century caught my eye. The headline read, "The Vanishing of Cathedral's Pilgrims, a Century-Old Mystery." My blood ran cold as I skimmed through the story. The cathedral described in the article matched the one from my dream down to the last detail. The towering spires, the crumbling stone, the haunting stained glass windows. It had been abandoned for centuries, standing on the outskirts of a forgotten town, where people spoke in hushed tones about the dark history surrounding it. According to the article, a series of disappearances had plagued the area over the years. People who entered the cathedral, pilgrims seeking spiritual enlightenment, or just curious explorers, never returned. Witnesses claimed to have seen strange lights coming from inside the cathedral at night, followed by whispers carried on the wind, though the place had long been abandoned. The locals had their theories, of course: ghosts, curses, the usual supernatural suspects. But one detail chilled me to the bone. Each person who vanished had reported dreams of a shadowy figure before entering the cathedral. This couldn't be a coincidence. My mind raced as I pieced together the puzzle. The dreams, the figure, the key. It was all connected to that place. I dug deeper, finding more disturbing reports. Journal entries from explorers and historians who had investigated the cathedral only to be driven mad by what they found inside. They all described seeing it. The figure, always lurking in the shadows, always watching. Some claimed the figure wasn't just a ghost or an apparition, but something far older, something that fed on fear and despair. As I scrolled through endless pages of reports, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The text was simple, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Stop looking. It knows you now. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Who sent this? How do they know? Panic welled up inside me, but I forced it down. I wasn't going to be scared off. Whatever this was, I had to get to the bottom of it. Ignoring the warning, I continued my search, finding more cryptic clues. Old photos of the cathedral with strange symbols carved into its stone walls. The same symbols I had seen in my dream. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to visit the town where the cathedral stood. As I approached the outskirts, the locals warned me to stay away, their faces pale with fear when I mentioned the place. People go in, but they don't come out, one old man told me, his voice trembling. Whatever's in there, it's been waiting. Ignoring their warnings, I made my way to the cathedral, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was even more foreboding in person. The air around it was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The moment I stepped inside, that same damp, metallic smell from my dream hit me like a wave, making me gag. It was all too real. The cold stone under my feet, the dark, oppressive shadows clinging to the walls, the echoing silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I ventured deeper into the cathedral, the sound of my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty space. It felt as though the walls were closing in on me, the oppressive weight of the place pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My every instinct screamed for me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. I had to know the truth. And then I saw it, carved into the stone at the back of the cathedral, half hidden by time and decay, was the same symbol from my dream, the same symbol etched into the box I had held. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the horrifying truth. The dream wasn't just a warning, it was a call. Something inside the cathedral had reached out to me, pulling me into its nightmare. I stumbled back, my mind racing. What was this? How was it all connected? And most terrifying of all, why me? As I backed away, the shadows seemed to grow darker, more alive. I could feel it. The figure, watching from the depths, its presence growing stronger with each passing second. My heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The dreams, the key, the figure, they were all part of a much larger, darker game. And now, I was caught in it. This was no longer just a dream. This was a nightmare that had seeped into reality, and there was no escaping it. The sense of dread that had followed me from cathedral clung to my skin like a cold, damp shroud, refusing to loosen its grip. My mind raced, replaying everything I had uncovered, but nothing made sense. The figure in my dreams, the key, the cathedral, they weren't just haunting symbols from a nightmare. They were real, interwoven into the fabric of my life in ways I couldn't yet understand. And I wasn't alone in this. The more I dug, the more I realized that others had experienced similar horrors, and all of them were connected to this cursed place. Driven by a relentless need for answers, I returned to the town, this time seeking out someone who might have first-hand knowledge. That's when I found her, Isabel Faulkner, a local historian who had spent years researching the cathedral and the dark legacy that surrounded it. She was an older woman, her face weathered by time and fear, her eyes filled with a haunted knowledge she seemed reluctant to share. When I mentioned the cathedral, she hesitated, her hands trembling as she sipped her tea, but after a long silence, she finally spoke. "There's something inside that place," she whispered, her voice low and shaky. "Something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. People think it's a ghost story, a local legend to scare off the curious. But it's real. I've seen it." Her gaze grew distant, as though she was seeing something far beyond the room, something dark and terrifying. "The figure, it appears to those who are marked. Once it shows itself to you, there's no escape. It follows you, waits for the moment you'll return to the cathedral, and when you do, you belong to it." Her words sent a chill down my spine, confirming the darkest suspicions that had been gnawing at me. The figure wasn't just a manifestation of fear. It was something alive, something that fed off those it ensnared. And worse, I was already marked. I could feel it in my bones, a growing sense of inevitability, like I was being pulled towards something I couldn't outrun. Isabel told me about others, people who had been drawn to the cathedral, just like me. Some were scholars, others were thrill-seekers or lost souls looking for answers to their own nightmares. But they all shared one thing in common. None of them had returned. There were stories, fragments of reports, of people disappearing into the shadows, claimed by the figure after their fateful visit. She spoke of strange occurrences in town, whispers of vanished residents, their homes left abandoned, with no trace of where they had gone. Some said the figure took them, but no one dared to look too closely, for fear they would be next. My heart pounded in my chest as she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've felt its presence, too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It watches, waits. It knows when you're close to the truth. It wants you to find it, but it never lets you leave once you do." The weight of her words settled over me like a suffocating blanket, the room growing colder by the second. I tried to hold back the fear clawing at my throat, but it was useless. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run as far from this cursed place as possible, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I could already feel the pull of the cathedral deep in my bones. It had a hold on me, and it wasn't going to let go. Desperate for a solution, I asked Isabel if there was any way to break free, to sever the connection. She shook her head, her face pale, her eyes filled with regret. "There's no escape," she said, her voice hollow. "Once it's marked you, the figure will haunt you until it gets what it wants. The only way to end it is to face it, but no one who has ever faced it has survived to tell the tale." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. There was no escape, no way to outrun this nightmare. The figure would follow me until it consumed me, dragging me into its shadowed world forever. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls of the room seemed to close in around me, the darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision, as though the figure was already here, lurking in the corners, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Isabel leaned closer, her eyes wide with fear. "It's already started, hasn't it?" she asked. "You've seen the signs, the shadows, the whispers. It's coming for you." I nodded, unable to speak. The signs had been there from the beginning. The shifting shadows, the cold that seemed to follow me wherever I went, the whispers that grew louder in the dead of night. And now, with every passing hour, the figure was growing bolder, closer. It was only a matter of time before it claimed me, just as it had claimed the others. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. If there was even the slightest chance of breaking free, I had to take it. "What does it want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why does it take people?" Isabel's gaze darkened, her voice trembling as she answered. "It wants your soul," she said. "It feeds on fear, on despair. The more you resist, the stronger it becomes. But once you give in, once you stop fighting, that's when it takes you." Her words struck me like a punch to the gut. I had been resisting this whole time, trying to escape the nightmare that had ensnared me. But she was right. If the figure grew stronger with every step I took away from it, Then I was playing right into its hands. I was feeding it, making it more powerful. The thought sent a wave of terror crashing over me. I was trapped in a game I couldn't win, a game where the only outcome was my destruction. There was only one option left. Face the figure, return to the cathedral, and confront whatever awaited me in those darkened halls. It was the only way to end this, to stop the nightmare from consuming me completely. But the thought of walking back into that place, of facing the figure head-on, filled me with a dread unlike anything I had ever known. Still, I had no choice. The figure wouldn't stop. It would keep coming for me, pulling me deeper into the darkness until there was nothing left of who I was. And so, with a heavy heart and the weight of inevitability pressing down on me, I made my decision. I would return to the cathedral. But as I left Isabel's house and stepped out into the cold night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was already waiting for me, watching from the shadows, biding its time. And as I walked, the whispers returned, soft at first, but growing louder with each step, until they were all I could hear. The figure was coming, and this time, it wouldn't stop until it had me. The path back to the cathedral felt longer than before, every step weighed down by a sense of impending doom. The night had fallen thick and heavy, wrapping the world in shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally around me. Even the moon, usually a comforting presence in the sky, was hidden behind swirling clouds, casting the world into an oppressive, suffocating darkness. The wind howled through the trees, but it wasn't just the wind. Mixed within it were whispers, soft, eerie voices that seemed to call my name, beckoning me back to the cathedral's cursed grounds. Each whisper sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder that I was walking straight into the jaws of whatever dark entity had marked me. When I arrived at the cathedral, it stood as it always had, silent, foreboding, a monolith of ancient stone looming against the sky. But this time, something felt different. The air around it was thick, almost alive with energy, and as I stood at the threshold, I could feel the invisible force tugging at me, urging me to step inside. It felt like the figure was waiting just beyond the door, biding its time. There was no going back now. I had to face it. The heavy wooden doors creaked open with a sound that echoed through the empty halls, a groaning, ominous noise that seemed to carry with it centuries of forgotten screams. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, the darkness swallowing me whole as I crossed the threshold. The interior of the cathedral was colder than before, the air thick with an almost tangible presence. The shadows clung to the walls like living things, pulsing and writhing in the dim light that filtered through the broken stained glass windows. I moved forward slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, every step echoing unnervingly loud in the silence. The silence was unnatural, oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I felt the weight of eyes on me, unseen, but unmistakable. The figure was close. I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, hidden in the shadows. I could sense its cold, dead gaze fixed on me, watching, waiting. As I ventured deeper into the cathedral, I noticed something strange. The symbols, the same ones I had seen in my dreams, carved into the stone walls, were glowing faintly, their light pulsating like a heartbeat. The closer I got to the altar at the center of the room, the brighter they became, as if responding to my presence. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what they were. Marks of possession, ancient symbols of binding that had been used to trap something within the walls of the cathedral. Something dark, something unspeakable. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, sitting on the altar, was the same small, ornate box from my dream. It looked exactly as I remembered, dusty, worn, and ancient. The key was back in my hand, cold and heavy, just as it had been before. My fingers trembled as I approached the box, a sense of dread washing over me with every step. The air around the altar was colder than anywhere else in the cathedral, so cold it made my breath hang in the air like fog. I knew that once I opened the box, there would be no turning back. I hesitated, my mind racing with fear and doubt. But before I could make a decision, the shadows at the edge of the room began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they coalesced into a single form, a tall, unnaturally thin figure that seemed to grow out of the darkness itself. It was the figure from my nightmares, more real and terrifying than ever before. Its long, skeletal limbs stretched out from its body, and its face, or what should have been a face, was nothing more than a blank, smooth surface, save for those terrible, hollow voids where its eyes should have been. My heart raced as the figure moved toward me, its steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. The air around it seemed to warp, bending reality as it passed. The closer it got, the more the temperature plummeted, until I could feel the frost creeping up my skin, chilling me to the bone. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The figure had me trapped, and I knew that running was pointless. Suddenly, the box on the altar began to shake, as though something inside it was alive, trying to escape. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, their glow casting eerie, shifting shadows across the room. The figure stopped a few feet in front of me, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, an overwhelming force of darkness and despair that seemed to seep into my very soul. For a brief moment, everything was still, as though the entire world had paused. And then, with a deafening crack, the box flew open. A blinding light exploded from within, flooding the cathedral and banishing the shadows. The figure let out a sound, a scream, but not of pain. It was a scream of something ancient, something that had been trapped for centuries and was now being forced into the light. The light consumed everything. The cathedral, the figure, even the air itself seemed to dissolve into it, until all that was left was the searing brightness and the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. When the light faded, I found myself lying on the cold stone floor, gasping for breath. The figure was gone. The box was gone. The cathedral was silent, save for the sound of the wind howling through the broken windows. I had survived, but as I stood up, my body trembling, I knew deep down that it wasn't over. The figure might be gone for now, but the mark it had left on me would never fade. I wasn't free. Not really. The nightmare was far from over. It was only waiting, biding its time. And when it returned, I knew there would be no escape. I don't remember how I made it out of the cathedral. The last thing I recall is the blinding light, the figure's hollow scream, and the feeling of being pulled into something far deeper and darker than I could comprehend. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air, and the soft beep of a heart monitor was the only sound in the room. I felt weak, drained, as though I'd been through a war I couldn't remember fighting. My mind was a haze of fragmented images, shifting shadows, the ancient box, the figure's hollow eyes, but none of it felt real. Yet the weight of the experience hung heavy on me, like a shadow that refused to lift. The doctors told me they found me unconscious in the woods near the cathedral. No one knew how I got there. My car was still parked miles away, the engine cold, as if I hadn't driven it in days. They couldn't explain the bruises on my arms, the frostbite on my fingertips, or the deep exhaustion that seemed to cling to every fiber of my being. All they knew was that I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had barely escaped something far worse than death. As I lay there, staring at the blank ceiling, the reality of what had happened began to settle over me like a suffocating weight. The figure, the dream, the cathedral, it wasn't just some twisted hallucination. It was real. And even though the figure had disappeared in that final blinding light, I knew it wasn't truly gone. I could feel it, lingering at the edges of my mind, like a dark presence that had woven itself into the fabric of my soul. The mark it had left on me was more than physical. It was deeper, an invisible scar that would never fade. The first sign that the nightmare wasn't over came that night. I was lying in the hospital bed, staring out the window at the moonlit sky, trying to convince myself that I was safe, that it was all over. But then I saw it, reflected in the glass, faint but unmistakable, was the figure. Standing in the corner of the room, just out of reach of the moonlight, its hollow eyes fixed on me. My heart skipped a beat, and I blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But when I opened my eyes again, the figure was still there, unmoving, watching. I tried to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat, frozen with fear. I reached for the call button, my hand shaking, but when I glanced down at it, I saw something that sent ice-cold terror flooding through my veins. On the back of my hand, faint but unmistakable, was the symbol. The same one that had been carved into the cathedral walls. The same one that had appeared on the box. It was burned into my skin, a dark, twisting mark that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light. I sat up in bed, my breath coming in shallow gasps as panic gripped me. I rubbed at the mark, desperate to erase it, but it wouldn't fade. It was as though it had become a part of me. The whispers returned, faint at first, but growing louder, swirling around me like a dark wind. They were speaking in that same ancient, unknowable language, their voices pressing against my mind, filling me with a growing sense of dread. The figure hadn't been defeated. It had only retreated, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And now, I was its chosen target. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure, its hollow, empty gaze piercing through the darkness. It followed me in my dreams, standing at the edges of my vision, watching, waiting. Even in waking hours, I felt its presence, always just behind me, just out of sight. The mark on my hand never faded. It pulsed with a cold, dark energy that I could feel seeping into me, growing stronger with each passing day. I began to notice the symbol in other places too, on street signs, carved into trees, even appearing in random reflections. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, a product of the trauma I had endured. But the more I saw it, the more I realized it wasn't just my imagination. The figure was leaving me a trail, marking its territory, reminding me that no matter where I went, it would follow. I couldn't escape it. The nightmare wasn't confined to the cathedral anymore. It had bled into the real world, and I was trapped in it. The worst part was the sense of inevitability. I knew deep down that it was only a matter of time before the figure came for me again. The dreams were growing more frequent, more intense. Each time, I felt myself being pulled deeper into its world, into the shadows where the light couldn't reach. And every time I woke up, the mark on my hand was darker, colder, more painful. The figure was waiting, biding its time, and when it struck again, I wouldn't survive. But what terrified me most wasn't the figure itself. It was the sense that I had missed something, some crucial piece of the puzzle that could explain why this was happening to me. There was something about the figure, about the cathedral, that I hadn't yet uncovered. A secret buried in the shadows, hidden behind the nightmares. I had to find it. I had to know the truth. But the deeper I dug, the more the figure tightened its grip on me, pulling me further into its darkness. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel it watching. The whispers are louder tonight. The shadows are darker. And the mark on my hand is burning, a constant reminder that I am not alone. The figure is coming for me. I don't know when, but I know it will be soon. I've tried everything, leaving town, changing my name, staying in the light, but nothing works. It always finds me. It's always there, just out of sight, waiting for the moment when I finally let my guard down. I don't know how much time I have left, but before it's too late, I need to leave you with a warning. Sometimes, the nightmares we experience aren't just dreams. They're doorways, and once you step through, there's no coming back. The figure is real. It's out there, and it's looking for more than just me. If you ever feel like something is watching you from the shadows, if you start seeing the mark, if the whispers follow you into the night, run. But know this, it will never stop. So I ask you, what would you do if you saw the figure? Would you face it, knowing the truth it hides might destroy you? Or would you turn away, hoping it never catches up to you? Share your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the nightmares we leave behind aren't gone. They're just waiting to catch up with us. And for me, well, I think it's already too late.